Howdy folks. Figured I was going to be up for a little bit, so I thought I'd do a little bit of an evening Bible study here. I'm going to be in Genesis chapter 1, and I got both the King James and the English Standard up. Kind of giving the English Standard a bit of a test drive, if you will. I like some of the translations, some of the way that it translates certain verses. 1 Peter 3:21 is a really good one. I think it's a very clear, does a good job of translating the Greek into modern English. So we're going to see how it goes. But I'm in Genesis 1, and I think the last live I did Genesis 1, talking about water and how that was actually created before light was created, and the importance of water in the necessity of baptism. So I'm not going to bring that up again. You can look at my last live for that. But hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm kind of having to be quiet because the kids are all asleep. So anyway, I'll actually be reading from the King James, and then I'll reference the ESV when I need to. It says, in the beginning, God. And when we look at eternity, a lot of people see eternity as kind of like super time. That it's like time, but above time, above the universe, outside the universe. But it's just this linear system that God exists in, looking down on regular time. And that's not appropriate. That's not eternity. That's not how eternity works. Eternity is a state of being, a different kind of existence where you're above and outside of time and linear thought. You exist in a way that you can see all of time. And that's part of, not entirely, but a part of God's perception as an omniscient being, is that he is outside of time and not bound by it. So in the beginning here is God talking to man. And when God speaks to man, he speaks to man in a way that man can understand. So the language that's used here is not a language that is mystical and somehow above, in some kind of heavenly language or some kind of superior idea. It's God talking to, frankly, a bunch of people wandering out in the desert, because this is Moses writing this during the 40 years of wandering after they left Egypt, after the events in Exodus that we see recorded there. So God is talking to people who don't have physics degrees and astronomy degrees and all these ideas of millions of years and billions of years and all of that kind of nonsense. He's talking to former slaves who are out in the desert. And we need to understand this in that context. It's always important to understand from the prime audience. So it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And that heaven there is singular in the King James. I'm not sure where it is in the Hebrew. I'd have to take a look that up. But I would imagine that it's heavens plural, in the sense that we're going to see space and time here. In the beginning, that's time, and heaven is space. And then later we're going to see the sky, which is also a type of heaven. There's actually 3 different literal heavens that are talked about in the Bible. And then the 4th is a metaphorical heaven where we talk about government and spheres of authority and things like that. So God created the heaven and the earth. And we know that the earth was just a big ball of water at that time, because there isn't anything else that's mentioned. Land doesn't show up until day 3. So we're talking about a big spherical ball of water here. And the earth was without form. Okay, that's part of why I believe this was a sphere of water, is because you don't have a definite form. If it was a solid rock at this time, it would have a form. It would have a definite shape to it. But without form means that you're looking at just something that like liquid doesn't have its own form. It takes whatever form of container it fills. And then void is just emptiness. There's nothing in it. And I don't want to get into the addressing all of the different hypotheses that come out of this. I just want to say what the Bible says and talk about that. And then if somebody has questions, we can deal with the gap idea or the day age nonsense or whatever. So, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So here we have God the Father, and we have the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, and we see in John chapter 1 and in Hebrews that Jesus was there creating. In fact, he's given as the primary creator, that everything was made by him, and without him was not anything made. So all three members of the Godhead are present, but the word God here is Elohim. It is a plural word, but it's spoken of as a singular. So that's a lot of people are like, well, Trinity's not in the Bible. The idea of Trinity, or the word Trinity, is not in the Bible. Yes, the word Trinity is not in the Bible. That was coined later, but the concept of Trinity is absolutely in the Bible, and I believe it's found in the fourth word that the Bible has written here, at least in the English, is the idea of God is Elohim, and Elohim is this plural singular, and I think that's the best kind of way to really describe who God is and what God is he's a plural singular. He's one God, three persons. So and we talk about who those, we narrow it down to three because they're talked about in other places, Matthew 28 and a whole bunch of other places where you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So that's why there's three. That's why it's a Trinity. But anyway, and so you have the Spirit of God moving upon the face of the waters. Again, the idea that water existed first, and that the earth is formless, that it doesn't have any definite shape to it because it's just water. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, a lot of people talk about how this is the background radiation of the universe, how there is this energy that's created. But one of the things that I've noticed about this is in verse 4, it says, "And God saw the light, and it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day." So one of the interesting things about this light, and I do think a lot of this is about the creation of energy in general. We could talk about the electromagnetic spectrum and all of that. I definitely think that's wrapped up in this. But you also have the idea here that on day one, immediately, essentially, you have light that is day. That means it's got to be directed. There is light coming at the earth for, you're looking at least 72 hours where there's no sun, but you have light coming in a directed fashion at the earth because it's evening and you have morning. And we know these are 24 hours days because you see in Exodus chapter 20 that the 6 days that the Israelites are supposed to work and the seventh they're supposed to rest are because God worked for 6 days and ceased his labor on the seventh day. And those days are the same. So we know that they're 24-hour days. We know the earth is at this time already rotating. And that means that the light, even on day one, was a directed light, whatever that means. Okay, we're talking supernatural stuff here. Not all of it needs an absolute explanation to it, but I'm just kind of going off of what's actually written here, that there is energy, there is light, there is a way that it's divided up into day and night. However God is working that, we're not told the mechanics, and I don't need to know the mechanics. So, evening and the morning, that's the way the Hebrews kept their day. That's important. We get into, I have an article on my website called Good Thursday, where that becomes important. But evening and the morning, night and day, that's how the Israelites, the Jews, the Hebrews kept their time. or the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And so this idea of middle, there's an expanse or a firmament, depending on what translation you're looking at, in the middle of the water. Now, that doesn't mean that somewhere out in the Atlantic Ocean or out in the Pacific Ocean there's air. It means that above and below. In verse 7 it says, "And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." So here we have the second heaven. The first heaven is space. The second heaven is this firmament. The firmament, or the expanse, is the atmosphere. And what's really interesting about this is that you have waters above it and waters below it. Remember, we don't have dry land yet. So we have this sphere of water separated by above the atmosphere, and then you have some more water above this. If you read in Josephus' Antiquities, in the very first book, in I believe it's paragraph 5, it talks about this crystalline, this idea of some kind of a crystal shell that was around the earth. And it's interesting that he brings that up. There's a lot of scientists, creation scientists out there that have looked at the idea of a canopy that protected us, and then they've come out and they said, no, that can't be the case for this or that, whatever reason. I haven't dismissed that. I've looked into it, and I think a lot of the things that they dismiss it for are based on assumptions, but I don't see why there would be a problem with a protective water canopy. Would have accounted for the long lifespans that we had, the strength of our genetic code as it was originally created. It would also account for why, after the flood, when that canopy was gone, that we began to have shorter lifespans, and that we began to really start to degrade. So I believe that for now. I think there's good evidence for that. So, and later on, we're going to see the birds are flying in the firmament. There's a lot of people, flat earthers. Those people. My patience is very tested with those people, but they say it's firm, it's firmament, it's solid, and I'm like, dude, birds are flying in it. It's just talking about the pressure. Air can have a feeling of pressure to it, and so to call it firmament or whatever, that's not a problem for me. So anyway, God called the firmament heaven. The evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together." So this is under the second heaven here. "Let the waters be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, or the land. That's the Hebrew word for land. And we're going to see that later on. It's very, very important, because Moses is laying the foundation for a lot of things that prophets will later draw on for their apocalyptic language, their symbolic language. And so God calls the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. So we have the creation of dry land. We have the creation of plants, plant life. And you already have light. You already have directed light. So we're not really worried too much about that. But we don't have a sun yet. So if you're gonna get into the evolution arguments, and you're gonna get into the apologetics and stuff like that, those are some things you got to contend with. There's no sun yet, but there is directed light, and there are plants, and so that's questions you've got to address with the theistic evolution, which I think is just compromising for no reason. But the other thing here is that you have plants are reproducing after their kind. This Brahma, this idea of created kinds, really puts a limit on the idea that God used evolution to get us here. Because if you accept what Moses is saying, because he's an inspired writer, then you accept that God is creating things after his kind. And you limit the idea that anything could go outside of its own kind and somehow give rise to something that's not of its kind. And so this idea of rocks to man evolution, if you hold to the idea that God did it, then you are holding to the idea that somehow this kind thing isn't really what happened. And so I don't know how people get around this. It's very clear that God limited the reproductive abilities of living things. So, verse 13, and evening and the morning were the third day, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. So, again, coming back to the flat earth people, they say, look, the lights were in the firmament. And so they say that, the sky and the sun and the moon, they're up there in that firm thing, whatever they believe that is. But this is just, again, we're talking to former slaves wandering around the desert. When they look up into the sky, what do they see? They see the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky, because they have to look through the sky to see these things. So if we understand things from their perspective, they didn't really have a concept of space in the same depth that we understand space. We understand there's a vacuum. We understand the moon is 100 times as far from the surface of the earth as the core of the earth. We understand that the sun is 146 million kilometers from us, and we understand the width of the entire solar system and how galaxies work and all that. Our technological knowledge is pretty vast compared to what these guys wandering around the desert would have known. So God, just talking to them in plain language, in a language they would understand, he talks about the sun, moon, and the stars up in the sky. And that's still how we refer to them. We talk about the sun setting. The sun doesn't set. The earth rotates away from it. But we speak in this common informal language. It's the way that most people perceive things from where we're standing. And that's how God is talking to these people. So also, he's providing something specific here. It says, let the lights in the firmament of the heaven divide the day from the night. So and here we have the sun finally available to provide a natural light rather than that supernatural directed energy that was coming at us for the first 3 days. And let it be for signs. What does that mean? Let it be for signs. I think a lot of people just kind of gloss over that idea or skip over that idea of let it be for signs. But I really think Moses is saying here, hey, I'm providing the literal anchor for what's going to be symbolic later. These signs or these symbols that are going to be pointed to. Here's the beginning of that, and I'm gonna start you off by anchoring it in reality, and then you're gonna draw on the reality and understand the symbolic that's going to point to all of the things that are going to come in the next 4,000 years. And so that word signs there is actually very, very important. And for seasons, our normal seasons, for days and for years. And so we're to the point now where we have a sun, and we have this idea of time being marked by these things. The sun does not provide time. Time is a separate thing. Time was created first. I firmly believe that time is real. There's a lot of people out there now that are just like, well, time's not really real. Time is this thing that we invented so that we can understand our reality. Well, I hate to tell you this, but I think time is very, very real. If time's not real, how are you calculating speed? Because speed is distance divided by time. So you have real distance divided by something we just made up. Are you saying speed is imaginary? Are you saying acceleration is imaginary? You have impulse is force times time. Is impulse something that's not real? We just make it up because time is just a made up thing? It's just a mental construct? No, I think time is very, very real. And I think time is independent of. Sorry, I'm getting adjusted here. I think time is independent of our timekeepers, like the sun, the moon, and the stars. So, anyway, I could get more into the physics of that if somebody has any questions. But what's really interesting here now is that we're getting into timekeepers, and for day 4, day 5, and day 6, and day 7, we have the sun. We have the sun who's telling us what a day is. And so for 4, 5, 6, and 7, these are days. Because a day is a day, and now the sun is keeping what a day is. So again, it's very clear that we're talking about a 24-hour day. We're not talking about these day ages that people are trying to read into this because they want to hold on to evolution or other nonsense. So, and so verse 16, and God made 2 great lights. Listen here. The greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. Moses is writing that God put the sun, moon, and stars into the sky for signs. And he wants them to be there to rule. Here's the first time, the very first chapter, we see the sun and the moon and the stars being associated with authority. So that when we talk about the 4th heaven, which is that sphere of authority, we come all the way back here to the very beginning in Moses, and we talk about the sun and the moon ruling the day, ruling the night, and the stars, which are lesser authorities, being created also. We'll talk about those if moving on into other Bible studies. Okay, so verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. So they're ruling over the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day, and now the sun is keeping time. God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that has life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that it was good. So God here is now on day 5, and he's creating fish and all of the things, and whales and all the things that are in the water, but he also creates birds. Now, if you follow the evolutionary idea, the way that it's taught is everything started in the oceans, crawled up on land, climbed up in some tree, and then finally made its way into the air. And that's not the way the Bible does it. So you're not going to get evolution from Genesis, because God says, I created the things in the water and the things in the air first. The land stuff doesn't come until the very next day. And so it just doesn't, there's no way to fit evolution into this. It just doesn't work. And I could go on and on and on about how evolution and theistic evolution are nonsense. But particularly day 5 presents an unsurmountable problem, because it's fish and birds, and there's no land things. So And God saw that it was good. And again, these things are reproducing after their kind, so there's a limitation on that. They're not going to go outside of their kind. Verse 22, and God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And evening and the morning were the fifth day. And God said, let earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, that's all the bugs and whatever, and the beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. So we're in day 6 now, and God's making all the land stuff. He's making all the cows. He's making all the beasts, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and all the creepy crawlies. And then God gets to the good stuff, the crowning achievement. Stephen says, yes, evolution says fish crawled ashore, became mammals, then crawled back into the water and became whales. I know, it's great, isn't it? So they just make it up as they go along, don't they? And then verse 26, and God said, let us, here's Elohim, the plural singular, God singular, let us, that's plural, make man in our image, after our likeness. Now, what does that mean? Well, God does not have a physical body the way that we do. He exists in eternity, and we read in John 4:24 that God is a spirit. So how is man created in God's image, and how are animals not? Well, God has created us in his image, and that he has made us a spiritual being. And in making us a spiritual being, there are all kinds of implications to that. Number one, we are the only moral creature in the universe. Only humans have the capacity for morals. Animals, you can't try a lion for murder. He goes out and kills that gazelle. You can't try him for murder. You can't murder an animal, for that matter. I had a lady, crazy. She sent me a friend request, and I warned her that I'm pretty adamant about my beliefs, and I was probably going to make her angry at some point. And then she got to talking about some poor couple had to put their dog down because it was just old and diseased, and it was in pain. And the vet said they couldn't do anything, so they put it down. And she was accusing them of murdering their dog. I'm like, you can't murder a dog. It's a dog. It doesn't have a soul, and it has no moral component to it. I respect people who want to make choices about what they eat. We're going to see here in a minute that mankind was vegan up until Noah. We didn't eat any animal, anything, up until after the flood. But that's fine if you want to do that. But to accuse that poor couple, they were already sad enough as it is having to put their dog down. But to accuse them of murder, you have no standard by which to judge that. Only humans are moral creatures, and it's because we're the only living thing that has a living soul or a spirit that's like God. It says so right here, Genesis 1. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Oh wait, I skipped part of 26 here. So God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let him have dominion, that's rule, authority over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. It was all made for us. Every bit of it. All of the planet, the water, the sky, space, the stars, sun, moon, animals, plants, every bit of what God created up to this point was made for us. And he gave us dominion over it to be good stewards of it. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Now this goes back to, or goes forward to, I guess, Matthew 19:4. Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees. And they're asking him about divorce. And he says, have you not read, that's here in Genesis 1, have you not read that in the beginning he made them male and female? If theistic evolution is true, we're not anywhere near the beginning anymore. The beginning was all millions of years ago in verse 1. But here we are in verse 6, millions of years later, and now he's making male and female. It doesn't work. But if we're only 6 days in to the entire existence of the universe, we're still in the beginning. So God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it." Now that word replenish is a King James word. And let's see if I can find it. ESV says, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it." So replenish is not, hey Brian, replenish is not a word that means to do it over again. A lot of people like to say that there was a civilization or man before Adam, and where did Cain get his wife, and all of this nonsense about Lilith and all of that. Man, you talk about reading some stuff into the Bible. And they base it off of this word replenish in the King James, but it's just an archaic word for us. It just means to fill. If you look at the original language, it just means to fill it up. And so we're going to stalk the earth, and we're going to subdue it. Okay, and we're going to bring it into command, under our command, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. And God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." That's food. Well, here God is giving us, mankind, food. And he's only giving us the plants. It says nothing about eating the animals. 30. "And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creeps upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat." And it was so. So what were the animals eating? They were also all eating plants. That's the only thing God gave to them. Okay, it just says it right here, black and white. I'm reading it. "God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day." So you have here God creating man, puts him in the garden, and he says you can eat of the vegetables, you can eat of the fruit, you can eat anything that's a plant, and the animals are going to eat plants. And that's it. That's all they could have. Now, I'm not going to get into the tree of life just yet. I'll probably do that when I do Genesis 2, but it's important to understand that we can't go beyond what's written. And God said, that he only gave plants. And it's not till Genesis 9 when we start talking about mankind eating animals. So, let's see. Stephen says, "I used the illustration with my father the other day about creation being like building a house. Foundation is laid, the walls raised, the roof built, electric, plumbing, sewage, AC are installed, and it's furnished. After all these things, the inhabitants move in. That's exactly how God made the creation for man. Man is not made for the house, but the house for the man." That is an excellent, excellent illustration. That's exactly right. Yeah, no, I am 100% with you on the extraterrestrial life, Stephen. I reject the idea of extraterrestrial life on those grounds. I even bring this up in my classes in public school. They'll ask me, especially because I teach physics, they'll say, "Mr. Lawrence, do you believe in aliens?" And I say, "No." And they say, "Well, why not?" And I was like, "Well, show me your evidence." Of course, they don't have any. And they're like, "But it's so big." And I'm like, "Look, that's not evidence in favor of aliens. That allows for there to be room for them, but that doesn't actually allow for them to be there." And they said, "Well, why don't you believe in them? Are you just holding out because there's no evidence or whatever?" And I say, "No, I know they don't exist." And they're like, "Well, how do you know that?" And I was like, "I can't talk about that. I'll get fired. I can talk about it outside of class, but not while you're a captive audience." And this is exactly the reason why, Stephen. You are exactly right. Genesis shows conclusively that the entire universe was made for man. And because of that, there cannot be any aliens. And I will, they say that creation doesn't make any predictions, so it's not scientific. Well, there's a prediction for you right there. We will explore the entirety of the universe, God willing, and we're not going to find any intelligent life anywhere. And I doubt we are going to find any life of any kind anywhere that we don't bring with us or send there first. If we find some bugs on Mars, it's because they hitched a ride on our junk when we sent it up there. So 100% agree with you on that. And in a way, it's kind of sad because, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. And I think it would be kind of cool in a way to meet some ETs. But I also know that God did everything he did for us. And that's going to probably anger a lot of people when they see this video. But they can't actually, through evidence and reason, provide any other understanding, any other thing other than, well, it's so big, and what about UFOs? And I'm like, those are not conclusive evidence of anything. So anyway, that was Genesis 1, and I've been on here long enough. Yeah. So I'm going to say goodnight, and I'm going to watch some TV, and then I'm going to go to bed. I got worship tomorrow. And thank you for watching, either live or later on after I post this up, wherever I'm going to post this up. And I hope you guys have a good evening.